Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's wonderful to see you all here, and it's particularly wonderful to see nearly the whole of Alastair's family here. And I'm Sue Jones. I'm director of DANSOX, and it's my great pleasure to welcome back to the JDP and to DANSOX Shobana Jeyasingh and Alastair Macaulay. Shobana is an international choreographer of renown, and Alastair is an international critic of renown. And they've both been here before. Shobana came 2 years ago, wasn't it, to do the Clorinda Agonistes workshop here, which was fantastic. Alastair's given many lectures here and inaugurated our summer school here, so we'll have to keep going with that one. I'd like to thank all the staff and of St Hilda's College and the JDP in particular, and Franco and James, wherever they are. Franco's back there, for helping us to put this on tonight. And it's my great, great pleasure to introduce you and let them get on with talking about Indian classical dance. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we certainly thank Franco. We've had a wonderful time, the tech run, with him already today. Can you all hear me all right? Is this picking up? I can hear lots of echoes. It's a little confusing. Also, I want to give you an advance notice, because as we were doing the tech run, it occurred to me that Sue Jones does this fabulous job for DANSOX, and she's always presenting and introducing, and she's never talking about her own dance career or her own tastes in dance. And I think she sometimes feigns to like some forms of dance more than she possibly does, which is too much a diplomat to say so. So I proposed to her, and she is not totally resisting the idea that in the next academic year we will have a Sue Jones evening where she does the dance equivalent of Desert Island Discs. And I'm volunteering to be the presenter on that occasion, to introduce.
No pressure. Thank you.
Pleasure. This is a lopsided evening. I'm a very enthusiastic outsider to Indian dance. In a way, a critic is always outsider, but much more so when I talk about dance from some other continents. But Shobana is by heritage and by practice an insider, at least to some degree, and she's going to explain where she's an insider and where she's not. We're going to be inviting questions from you all at the end, so make mental notes of things, or indeed pencil notes, as we go along. Over to you, Shobana.
Thank you very much, Sue and yourself, for inviting me. Yes, I'm a kind of insider and an outsider at the same time, which I'm hoping will become clearer as this evening goes on. Anyway, I think we're going to start off with the dance form that I'm most familiar with, because that's the one that I learned. And the reason we put it at the beginning is because as we look at the other dance forms, perhaps some of my comments might help in elucidating the other forms that we're going to see, because there are things that they have in common. So, Bharatanatyam, it's a sort of a new name for this dance actually. It's from South India, it's from Tamil Nadu, which is where I also come from. Yes. Is that better? Sorry. Sorry, don't worry, you need to hear me. Is that better? Yes, good. Okay, so Bharatanatyam is from Tamil Nadu, and most people think everything Indian is very, very old, but actually the name Bharatanatyam is actually very, very new as it happens. And again, we're hoping you understand why it's new. I think the fact that it's from South India is very important, because actually there's a huge division between North and the South, at least especially if you're from the South, that's what it looks like. Just a very tiny example. In terms of culture and linguistics, South India, we come from the Dravidian culture, and the North is a non-Dravidian Aryan culture. So there are these kind of deep differences. Though obviously there are also other things that bind the South and the North together. So I think that difference in culture, in history, is kind of quite important to keep in mind. In classical dance, including Bharatanatyam, traditionally there are 4 ways of communicating. First is called Angikam, which is communication of the body. Next, Vachikam, which is communication through words, sounds, so it includes music and poetry and text. Aharyam, which is costume and decoration. And Sattvikam, which is communication through internal processes, so the individual things that the dancer or the performer brings, the nuances, the shades of meaning. So
I never knew those 4 terms before tonight, so I'm already learning a lot. Thank you.
So we're going to look at one of the techniques in Indian dance called Nritta, and which actually it concentrates on that very first category I mentioned, Angika, which is communication through the body. And I'm just going to give you a few things that I hope would help you enjoy the little clip that I'm going to play for you. So the first thing about Bharatanatyam is its use of tension. There's a word which we call aluttam, and aluttam actually means pressing. I really should have worn a sleeveless thing, so I wanted to show you what this means by just seeing how the arm is used. So the first thing you do for the arm is actually, your shoulder joint, you rotate. And then you make sure that your elbow joint is facing the floor. You can try that when you're sitting down, it's quite difficult. What it does is you've got to really use these back muscles to support it. And then that shouldn't happen when you rotate, so you rotate it back. There are 3 types of rotations already in that arm. So for example, when I've taught hand, because a lot of people get very distracted by hands and the way Indian dance uses hands. So for example, you take a shape like this and you show it to somebody, often you just get this. And then they're very surprised when you tell them actually it's got to start from your spine. So that's an incredible amount of muscular work. And so what it does to this arm is it makes the arm a bit like a piece of steel. So unlike Western contemporary dance, which is a lot based on release technique, where the energy and the tension of the body is going away from the body, in Bharatanatyam, the tension is totally held inside the body, and it makes it, in a way, I think it's quite challenging if your idea of grace is something that's about flow, or if you think about elegance as something very stretched, like if you think about grace as something flowing freely. Actually, in Bharatanatyam, it works against those kind of principles because nothing is released. It's where the body is held in an incredible state of tension. So managing this tension in movement and in terms of articulating all the little extremities that you do, that's the kind of challenge of Bharatanatyam. So sometimes, like when I see the ballet La Bayadere and Nikita, who's meant to be an Indian dancer, Indian temple dancer, when you see her Indianness supposedly translated through this kind of amazing flowing spine, I have to smile because it's exactly the opposite in Bharatanatyam. Second is rhythm, because I think you really need to know a little bit about how rhythm works in Indian classical dance. In Western music, you have melody and harmony. That's the kind of, it's how people play with that. That's the kind of the intellectual part of music. You'd probably get a bit bored if it was just only the melody. In the Indian classical music, especially for dance, it's melody and rhythm. So the rhythm actually is the intellectual part of the music, or one of its. Often in Western music, rhythm is the most predictable thing. It's the one that makes you go 1, 2, 3. But actually, in Indian rhythmic patterning, it's the most unpredictable part. So in the piece of dance that you're going to be hearing, you'll hear the melody, which will be repeated. So it's going in 8s. But then if you listen to the drum and listen to the dancer's feet, you'll see that in fact the thing is completely patterned in very, very intricate ways. So just as an example, a very common patterning is where phrases of music are finished in very geometric ways. So with an 8, you could pattern it like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Now, to people who are listening, I've articulated a 9, a 7, a 5, a 3, and a 4. So it's a bit like a little triangle. And in order for it to sit in a 8-beat rhythm, I've got to leave out the first beat. So I've got to go 1, 2, like that. So those kind of little pauses in music are very common in the way dance and music work together. And they're called karvi, which is a pause. And when you're a dancer, it's, it's the kind of thing that really makes you annoyed, because you're not allowed to dance on the beat. You just dance just after the beat. But you have to control the rhythms where actually it all adds up to those 8s or 6s or 9s or whatever they are. So that's something you can listen to and appreciate. The other thing is there are different flavors that are used in Indian dance. So there are 9 different emotional states or flavors. For example, fear, surprise, disgust, laughter. One of them is shringar, which is love or flirtatiousness. So you'll see that even though this is an abstract dance and that it's not telling a story, the dancer's face actually uses this flavor of shringar. It's a kind of, it's a sort of flirtatiousness. For me, it's about the sexual confidence of a woman. And without getting too heavy about it, it kind of goes back into, in Hinduism, there's something called Leela, which is the love play of the gods between Shiva and Parvati, and it's the energy that comes from that. So Shringar captures that. So even though we're talking about arithmetic, it's still given in the flavor of a kind of an erotic flavor. Last thing is decoration, aharya, because you'll see the dancer is very highly decorated. And sometimes in a kind of post-Reformation world, you say, well, why do we need all this? Can we just have her in tights to be able to see the shapes that she makes? But actually, it's quite, I think it's one of these, the hardest thing, I think, for Indian dance to communicate is why things are highly decorated. Because for me, in English, even to say the word decoration, immediately you have something that's something of surface. So the real thing is underneath, so it's plain speaking. So there's a kind of a distrust of any surface that looks overly ornate. But Indian dance comes from a pre-Reformation culture, if you like, where decoration is part of the message. It's an implicit trust in the surface. So you don't look at a decorative surface and think, oh, I want to take all that. I want to get to the real thing beneath the decoration. The decoration is the thing. So let's have a look at Valli doing the first video. Thank you.
I already learned so much I've never heard.
So you can see whether you can count the fours while she's dancing. 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. One. 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 One.
That is amazing because I would never have guessed the ones I was saying.
Okay, all right, we can stop this one. It's almost finished now. Okay, I think we can. Okay, Franco, we can stop that if you like. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, right.
That's one.
Thank you.
I'm going to interrupt just because
Go on.
among many things I'm learning from watching that or being reminded of is that Bharatanatyam always seems to me the most three-dimensional of all the Indian forms. That is, so often you see the dancer addressing north, south, west, east, and turning absolutely through the body in the most thrilling way.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it's painful and difficult dance form, but it's beautiful effects.
So completely. You're talking about turning the arm and the wrist.
It is. So the next piece of dance, again, Bharatanatyam, it highlights another part of the dance called Nritya, which is about expressing or telling a story. I always find it very difficult to translate these things because Nritya, more than anything else, really comes from a very shared, a deeply familiar, very cherished, a shared cultural experience. Because it's not really, when stories are told, it's not like mime where actually the body takes on the full responsibility of the story. A lot of it is to remind you of things that you already know. So it's a bit like if you were a Christian and you're living in Tudor times and you're listening to William Byrd's Requiem. It's all these things that you're listening. It's about familiar ritual. It's about being reminded rather than telling you something new. So I think it's that reminding aspect is so strong that I think it's quite. I think people have to work very hard to get into the storytelling, the expressive part of Bharatanatyam. So this particular one, actually, it's a song that I heard when I was about 5 years old, and it probably was one of the reasons I was so taken up with this dance form. It's written by a Tamil poet called Papanasam Sivan, and he was a very religious man, and so it comes from his own sense of devotion, and it's addressed to a god who is very loved in Tamil Nadu, called Murugan. And so it's addressed to him. And the whole song is really about saying it addresses him in different ways. It describes his many features, and basically it says, "Come and protect me." That's the sort of theme of the song. So one of the stories that the dancer puts in, even though in the song we're not actually told the story, but she puts the story in a way to remind the listeners, to put them in the mood, if you like. So the story that she tells, and you can see whether you can recognize it when she says it, it's Murugan is meant to be the younger son of Shiva and Parvati. And they have an elder son who is Ganesh, who is the one who has the face of the elephant, and he's kind of short and stocky with a little paunch. So this sage comes to Shiva and Parvati with the fruit. It's a bit like Garden of Eden, it's the fruit of knowledge and wisdom. So the parents say, whoever can go around the world 3 times fastest, they can have the fruit. So Ganesha says, well, how can I do that? Because I'm very short. I've got short legs. I'm not very fit. Muruga has got the peacock, and he gets onto his peacock and whirs around the world. But Ganesha says, actually, the worlds are my parents because they created the world, so I should just go around them 3 times. And so that's what he did, and he got the fruit. So Muruga got very angry, and he took off his crown and all his jewels, and he went into this hill called Palani, and that's where he is. So that's where one of his main temples are. So his mother actually tries to tell him, because he's very angry, she says, you are the fruit. You don't need the fruit, you are the fruit. So in Tamil, Palam ni, you are the fruit. So he lives in this hill called Palani, and this song is about that. So, well, let's see how much you're going to enjoy this kawawa. Okay, thank you. So I put this on because it's got nothing to do with the dancer, it's another performance. But for me, the intimacy of those musicians who will be on stage, you can see they're dressed beautifully, they've got flowers in their hair, in their best saris, and they're just talking to each other and just waiting for the dancer. And the violinist is improvising the raga for which the song is set. So, to me, the reason I liked it is because it seems to me that it really exemplifies something very shared, very intimate, and very known. And I think you'll just hear the sound of the dancers' bells. Can you hear? Yeah. So that's the excitement of being on stage, watching these musicians. You hear the dancers' bells and you know something's going to happen. So that's the fruit, and that's Ganesh getting a bit worried. I'm a bit fat. What am I going to do? And he says, okay. And then there's Muruga with his peacock. He says, why don't you go? So he goes round, and then he sees that his brother has got the fruit, so he's really annoyed. Takes off his crown, he throws it away. He goes down to the hill. So Muruga, protect me, is what she's dancing now. All right, that's fine, that's enough.
it's somewhat incorrect these days to say that anybody has physical beauty, because how do you judge these things? But I think we've agreed that we are showing you at least 4 particularly beautiful people. And you can strike us off your list for saying something so incorrect. Is it me now?
Yes, I think it is. Yes.
Thank you. I'm really just going to make now, after that wonderful introduction on Bharatanatyam, some more general introductory points on all the Indian forms. We're going to concentrate on the 8 classical forms, as so-called, of Indian dance. But we do want to say straight away that there are lots of other non-classical forms in Indian dance. For example, we could be here all night just showing you Bollywood. We like Bollywood, we've had much good time. It's a whole genre. And probably the only part of the world now, India, where musicals, dance musicals, keep being turned out as a regular part of the culture. Another general point which has become already so apparent is that the dances of India and all South Asia really are based on the use of the bare foot. And I believe some dance teachers in Bharatanatyam, but probably all the genres we talk about, would sometimes just judge a dancer by listening to the feet. Looking is one thing, but I know in the biography of Bala Saraswati, she said her teachers would just listen for the sound, just how the full foot struck the floor, and that was one of the criteria. Of course, as you've also seen, Bharatanatyam and other forms make extraordinary uses of the fingers and of the eyes, and as you say, articulating the whole of the arm and back. That comes from the whole of South Asian forms, but India, I think, brings them most to the fore. Another point which I think, again, you've shown, is that Indian forms make a tremendous use of repose and stillness as well as movement. And very often the stillness is sculptural. And of course, when you go to India, you see so much sculpture of the body in the temples and so forth, and there's a connection between the sculpture and the dance forms. I talk about this with great authority. I am an outsider. All of these forms across South Asia, as I understand it, are really deriving information, and you're going to correct me here or add to me here, from the kind of textbook or manual called the Natya Shastra, which is very vaguely understood. It may come from as long ago as 500 before the Christian era. It may come from as relatively recent as 500.
I think the dating of Natya Shastra really depends on how patriotic you want to be.
Oh, tell.
It can be very, very old, so it could be, well, I mean, obviously it's not recent, but you know, the kind of range. I think, yes, it's a classical text. I think all it proves, in a way, is that drama and theatre, probably like in ancient Greece, were taken incredibly seriously. And on the whole, Indians have a great love of categories, actually. Probably that's the reason there are so many wonderful software engineers in India. I think there's a real love of just lists, computations. So actually, Natya Shastra is a wonderful manual of, it's not really showing you how to do it, but actually it's like, you know, what I said at the very beginning, the 4 types of communications, you know, through the body, through the voice, through decoration, through sattvika. So I think it lists all the different properties.
And criteria?
Yes, criteria. And for example, one of the things that I remember from the Natya Shastra, where it says, where the hand goes, the eye goes. Where the eye goes, the mind goes. And where the mind goes, where we have rasa. So it has this aesthetic theory of the rasa, a bit like the Greeks had catharsis. So the high point of any art is the emotion that you invoke in the audience, you know. So, but actually, again, growing up in the South, it's not so much the Natya Shastra that we have as an inspiration for dance. There's a very old classic, a bit like the Odyssey, called Silapadiharam, which was written again anywhere between 5th century BC or 5th century AD, depends. But it's about, one of the characters is a beautiful dancer, a Devadasi, a courtesan, and she's very beautiful. In fact, when I see Valli, I kind of think she would be the perfect person in the story. And there it says how many types of dances she did, something about her performance, how she was dressed. So those are also things that, apart from the Natya Sastra, there are also other treatises that you find. So generally, I think the importance of not just dance, but dance as part of theatre, and how to get the best. How do you define a very good theatrical performance?
Wow.
I think that's what one learns from the Natya Sastra,
Thanks so much. A crucial point, obviously, about Indian dance is that whereas the Christian world long ago was taught that dance is secular and that you cannot worship God through dance, and that was very firmly ordained around the 3rd century AD. India is, of course, one of the cultures where worshipping God, the gods, through dance is absolutely part of the culture, which leads to so many different ideas of the self. And here's something that I want to know Shobana's opinion on. But it seems to me that every Indian dancer, even if they are representing Shiva or Krishna or any of the gods, have a certain kind of modesty about them, because there are everything in the dance form shows them that they are part of something larger in the cosmos than themselves. And dancers tend to be extremely objective, as I say, modest. I mentioned this in an email to Shobana, and she said, well...
Well, yes. I mean, there is... because... It's a kind of a long story. I mean, actually, Bharatanatyam was very erotic. I mean, actually, when you see traditional Bharatanatyam, that Shringaram, which I spoke about, eroticism, is it was a very powerful part of the dance. Later on, during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, when Bharatanatyam was revived with a lot of Victorian values, then actually there was a different view onto the erotic part of dance. But one of the things that happened in Indian dance is that often this eroticism is presented as a metaphor, so that the dancing body is the supplicant, the devotee, and the lover is God, when it's Krishna or whoever it is, Shiva. So obviously the dancer is always in the mode of the supplicant. So obviously that I can understand, that always shows the dance. Like, for example, the dance that we just saw, Kava, the woman is there, she's wanting, she's in a suppliant sort of mode. But I don't know whether actually that translates into real life. I mean, I think...
I'm sure if you visited the dressing rooms afterwards, you'd see temperament.
Well, the thing is, it's a solo art form. So actually, it produces people who are incredibly confident, who are used to controlling space, and who are often acting out gods and goddesses. So I think when they leave the stage, there's a question as to whether... It's a hard habit to shake off, being gods and goddesses. But it's very nice of you to say that Indian dance is very modest. I'm sure they'll be thrilled.
Much to pursue here. We have here, thank you, Franco, here one of the gods. This is Shiva Nataraja. Shiva is, of course, one of the greatest gods in Hindu religion. But here, as Nataraja, he is Lord of the Dance. And this is perhaps the clearest example in world culture of an important god being a dancer. And it's not just any dance. He's there seen amid the circle of flame, and the whole image is balancing on a tortoise. The whole idea of balancing while dancing, while amid flame, helps to illustrate that Shiva is the lord of both creation and destruction, and therefore getting into a very complicated philosophical thought, and dance is at the center of it, and God is at the center of the dance. Other gods, of course, are seen as dancing as well. Further point I want to make, though, away from gods, or connected to gods, is that most of these forms were developed in the temples, and they were connected, as Shobana has been saying, to a kind of the temple prostitute form, that is the Devadasi. In Western form we now say bayaderes, but the Devadasis were extraordinary women, and we have accounts of them from 4 centuries ago with being decorated in jewels from head to feet. They were women of great power, but they were also bestowed by the temple to men who bid a certain amount for them. That's not to say they're normally prostitutes in the Western sense of being available on the night to a different bidder. For example, in the early 20th century, the great dancer I've already mentioned, Bala Saraswati, was given to one man, and I think that was the only man for her life. He was an extremely rich local man. Later on, she had pupils, one of whom I know and I'm in touch with, and this pupil said, my Bala Saraswati once said to me, "You've married for love, haven't you? I envy that. I never had the chance to love my lover." And the man I was given to sometimes hit me across the face. So she was mistreated. Nonetheless, she was extremely respected, first in India and around the nation, or around the world, as one of the greatest of all dancers. But that's what she had to put up with. That was the condition of the Devadasis at that time. Because of this, gradually, maybe at the end of the British Raj, maybe because not so much of the British as the Indian Theosophical Society, at the end of the British period, people started to clean up Indian dance forms as best they could. And if it wasn't done in the British regime, you may be sure it was already done once the Indian Republic had begun. People were trying to get rid of the Devadasi, the prostitute connection of these dance forms. And that means there's controversies, not least with Bharatanatyam, as to the whole tradition of these forms. For example, Bala Saraswati, this pupil, I can't remember her name, whom I met in Chennai, and indeed I met her on the day of Shiva Nataraja at the temple of Chidambaram, which is so significant for Shiva. I was mentioning the biography I'd been reading of Bala Saraswati by her Bala's son-in-law, Douglas Knight, and she said, "There are two sides. You are either on my side for Bala Saraswati, or you are on Douglas Knight." So a deep Indian controversy here. But really her point is you have to understand the Devadasi tradition, whereas, not so much to do with the son-in-law, but probably at the end of the British Raj, people started to clean up Bharatanatyam, particularly at a school in Chennai, which is Kalakshetra, and to teach it, partly connecting it more to ballet principles, but to give it a formal academic language and structure that had nothing to do with the Devadasi tradition. That led to a split in Bharatanatyam. I would say most people you now see in Bharatanatyam, and that's where come out of Kalakshetra, but nonetheless there are still some Devadasi pupils along.
Well, I mean, the Devadasi, I think, is a bit like a courtesan. I think the idea of a courtesan exists in many cultures, like Japanese culture, and I think even in French. The courtesan was traditionally a very educated person. In fact, they were probably sometimes they had more chance of education than perhaps a woman, who got married early and had lots of children, had to look after them. So, and they were very well versed in, dance and music and literature. And I think, like any system, that was sometimes abused. And the courtesans, sometimes Bharatanatyam was, at times in its history, it was patronized by the temples, other times it was patronized by courts. And I think in both areas, probably, there were instances where the Devadasis became known as, well, actually, I don't know if prostitute is the right word. I mean, there were women who weren't obviously following the traditional marriage and children route that other women were, probably. But I remember my dance master, I particularly did not want to learn in Kalakshetra because for me, when I wanted to choose a tradition which was actually a little bit closer to the original traditions of the dance. Because even now, you've got choices. I mean, you can either learn it from the older gurus who may not be so organized, so you come to their house to learn at 9 and they probably start at 11. It's a different. So or you can learn it in a much more formally organized way in a college.
Wow.
So, and they have two very different ways of looking at, particularly Bharatanatyam. So I think the whole Devadasi tradition was probably like misunderstood, because over the years, I think especially when the British took over the administration of India, the Victorian attitude towards these women obviously was very negative. They felt that they had to save these women from what they called was slavery to the temples or the kings. And so the whole of that dance fell into disrepute. And as you were saying, what happened is during the move for independence from Britain, a lot of other types of women, because traditionally these women who were dancers did not come from the upper caste women. They came from a caste which actually their speciality was music and dance, Isai Borlala, as we call. So when the move for independence paralleled this, what's called the self-respect movement, because I don't know, I don't think it was a relative, but there was a man called Macaulay who in like 1838, he brought the Act of Indian Education, and basically he kind of said all Indian culture is not worthy of anything and everyone's got to be educated in English, and so I think this left a lot of Indians feeling very alienated from their own culture. So part of the pushback was to look at these dances, things like the dance, like Bharatanatyam, and say, well, we want this to be like ballet. And I think they slightly overcorrected, because they got rid of the eroticism, they changed the costume, they wanted to link it to what they felt is another classical language, Sanskrit, because they felt Sanskrit was like Greek and Latin, so it's going to have the same amount of respect. So they kind of made a whole, they yoked it to a tradition which they felt would give Indian classical dance more respect. And I think it also comes back to this amazing dating of everything Indian as very ancient and very, the word hoary tradition was used in a lot of dance programs. I mean, it's understandable. I think it comes from people who felt under-respected culture. And so I think there was this huge overcorrection as to push Indian dance up and to make it, in some ways, I think it was also asking for validation from the West. Mm-hmm. So I think it was trying to make dances like Bharatanatyam, more worthy of respect. And they kind of felt that unless it was very old and had lots of spiritual things to say about itself, and it was all in Sanskrit, people weren't going to like Bharatanatyam. And now, I mean, there's a whole pushback, because the dance, in a way, for some people, it was stolen from the caste and community people who did it for centuries, and then it moved into cities, and then it was done really by upper caste and well-privileged people. And now, actually, there's a huge pushback to try and see, for the original dancing community to get that dance back. Am
I right that the Devadasis also were largely matrilineal, that would be passed on from mother to daughter to daughter?
Well, the dancing was, and usually the men were the Natuvangam, so they did the music, and then the women did the dance, so they were all together. But Bharatanatyam as a form is a very empowering form for a woman, because, it's a bit like women in, say, medieval Europe. It's the ones who became nuns and abbesses. They were the ones who had the time to go and study and to educate themselves. So they were the earlier writers, were probably people like Julian of Norwich. So in a way, these women actually, because of their employment, they actually had the time to learn, because, as we saw, Bharatanatyam is not just about dance, it's also about poetry, it's about aesthetics, it's a whole arts education, really. They were the people who had an arts education, so they weren't, that's why I think it's, wrong to even think of them as prostitutes in that way. They were, I think, courtesan sort of maybe explains it better. So Bharatanatyam particularly, it's an incredibly politicized form. I mean, it has gone through amazing changes in its look, in its costumes, in its even in the songs that it was performed. Because like song that I played, that is in Tamil, there was a time when people thought it's much better to do dances in Sanskrit. So it's a bit like saying, I'm not going to do Welsh, I just want to do Latin, So it's a sort of a change in its in the validation of the dance. So it's...
And you've touched on so many important points. One is, as you say, that particularly in the Indian Republic period, people have now started to name 8 forms as classical.
Yeah.
In fact, in some cases, they may not be that old range.
Yeah.
Bharatanatyam is one of the genres we know goes back centuries.
Yeah. But it all depends on what you mean by classical.
Yes, that's the other problem.
You see, I mean, lots of folk dances go centuries, probably older than classical. I think originally is my feeling. I mean, if you look at the Natya Sastra or if you look at Silapadiharam, there is no idea of classical dance. There's just dance, and it has certain purposes. And people thought a lot about how to make good theatre and good dance. But what is classical and non-classical? I mean, I can't really find any evidence in Indian literature for it. The whole idea of classical really, again, came from this revivalist time. Because, again, I think a very central person in the revival of Bharatanatyam was this very highly educated Brahmin woman called Rukmini Devi. She was 16. She married a 42-year-old Englishman who was a theosophist. So she was an unusual, very bold woman. And I think, again, I think the classical, again, it is giving that respect because people felt that it would sell better, it would gain people's respect if you say this is classical. So at the beginning, they kind of said, that we're going to call that classical. And then suddenly lots of people in India saying, what about this dance? Shouldn't this be called classical? And actually, in a way, I don't know. I mean, yes, it's old, but then lots of things are old. Rule-based, lots of folk dances are very rule-based. Obviously, these are more complicated rule-based, perhaps. Maybe using classical languages. I think its relationship to music and following musical norms that also gave it a weight, so it's not like anyone could just make stuff up. You're following. So it's a kind of validation through rules. But
nice.
I really don't know any other why anything is less or more classical than...
No,
apart
love that.
from, I don't know, say ballet, okay, it's classical. Scottish folk dance, is it classical? I ask. I mean, it's just as rule-based, people, or, is flamenco classical? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a kind of snobby thing, really. I think finally, it's...
And am I right, in India, one is dealing with a lot of snobbery?
Yeah, I think it's cultural snobbery. Yeah. It's about money. It's about something, if you pay £100 to see, it's probably better be classical, I guess, unless you're going to see Ariana Grande, which is £250. I don't know. I think it's to do with where people give value, what do people give value to? And I think in Europe particularly, I think the whole classical thing comes from people's respect for Greek and Roman tradition. So anything that has a connection to that, one would call classical, I presume. I don't know.
Every time I venture a new point, you come up with so many points, and we may be here all night, so I'm going to rush through the next one.
Please do. I shouldn't talk
which is
classical.
Probably one of the reasons these forms are called classical, is because even though this has been added maybe just in the Republican period, these forms tend to divide into, they alternate between two genres, which is abhinaya, which is expressive dancing, often mime-based, and nritta, which is pure form. The word abstract is sometimes used, and when I put this in an email to Shobana, she said, I'm not sure that the word abstract ever applies to dance, which was honey to me, because I absolutely agree there is no such thing as abstract dance. Where there is a human being, there is meaning and character. So let's rush past this. Another point to make is simply that Indian dance is an absolute goldmine for gender studies. There are dance forms that have been traditionally only done by men. There are dance forms that have only traditionally done by women. This has started to change in recent years. I'm going to show you photographs of Kathakali, which until recently has been absolutely all male, even though they play women's roles. But just recently I gather that Kathakali is also now done by women. Can we look at the next picture? Yes, so this is the one I can't pronounce. Ardhanarishvara, the god, thank you.
Well done.
The god who embodies both sexes. And this is something that goes deep in Indian culture, the idea that the androgyne, the hermaphrodite, is absolutely an important force. And I think you'd like to choreograph the Ardhanishvara yourself?
Well, actually, if you're a Bharatanatyam dancer, one of the items that you dance most probably is about Ardhanarishvaran.
Great. I'm sorry we don't have time to show you Bollywood. And I'm sorry we don't have time to show you lots of folk forms. I'm simply going to touch briefly on two. Can we look at 3 photographs of Chow? Am I pronouncing it right, by the way? And the next. And the next. It's really a form of martial arts dance. Shobana, you know a little bit more than I do.
Well, I don't know much more than you do, I'm sure. There are different forms of Chow. The reason I've liked Chow is because again, it's very athletic because it's got the kind of martial arts influence, but mainly also because it's got a very circularity to the way it moves the body, which as a Bharatanatyam dancer, when I became a choreographer, I loved using that aspect of the dance. You know? I think it's a brilliant, brilliant dance form, Chow. I really do, yeah.
Now I'm going to show you just photographs from almost the oddest dance experience of my life. I was in Kerala in December 2014, and I didn't know much about, I knew very little about Teyam, or Deyam as it's sometimes pronounced, but I could see it happened in Kerala, and I could see it happened in northern Kerala, so I went up to northern Kerala and just started to ask people if I could see any, and it took a whole day of them saying, well, it's not happening today, but they drove me around, and then they said, get to this village at 6 a.m., and it took about an hour's drive from my hotel. It was all written in non-British script, so I did not know where I was going. First photograph, please. This is taken at about 6:30 in the morning. Very dim, as you can see. Light was very vague, but I could gradually see that some kind of dress-up and makeup was going on. Next photograph, please. This is probably now 7 o'clock in the morning. Now I start to see somebody being dressed in Teyam style. The full dress and makeup probably goes on for about 3 hours. And as you see, it's not just makeup, it is costume as well. But believe me, you haven't seen everything yet. And this is, I think, before 7 in the morning. Next, please. There's more of the amazing costume, this ship-type thing that is attached to him. That I should explain one thing about Teyam. I recommend to all of you a book written by the wonderful Indian scholar William Dalrymple. It's called 9 Lives. It's called A Search for the Sacred in India. And he has a whole chapter on Teyam performers. They are men, and they are the lowest caste of Kerala society. They are the men who clean the toilets. But for 3 months of the year, they are absolutely in demand, and they don't just dress as the god. As the makeup and costume are applied, they become the god. It's absolute incarnation. Next photograph, please. This is when the dance begins. It was the oddest dance I've ever seen, because after all this makeup and costume is applied, it's physically very, very constricted. Next photograph, please. Look at this, extraordinary. That's one of the photographs I'm most proud of having taken. Next, please. This is in the next village I was taken to. I was rushed away from one village to this one, but actually this one we only had time to look at the makeup being applied. Next one, please. Now we're in the third village. Look at this makeup. It's still being applied. Next. Now you see the whole grass skirt and everything being added. Next, please. Now this weird thing, this grass, what do we call it? Hoop was put around him, absolutely pinning his arms up there so he could hardly move the arms at all. And he's kind of passive within it. Next, please. Look at that makeup. That's really the photograph maybe I'm most proud of. Next, please. Now he starts to spin, but with his arms absolutely stuck up there, he has so little mobility, but at least he can spin. And I think at one point people were throwing rice at him, and the dress helped him to sort of distribute the rice. What that was about, I don't pretend to know. Next, please. Now he kind of retreats into the temple steps. It was the strangest morning of my life, and nobody quite explained to me what was going on. But deeply, deeply fascinating. If you read about Tayam, and William Dalrymple writes about them, he sees Tayam of another form. If you go at night, and it happens usually in forests, these men, because they're so much the god that they dance on burning coals and they jump over fire and all this kind of thing. I never saw anything that thrilling. I saw this much weirder, more constricted dance in the early hours of the morning. Now let's move to the classical forms. I think we're now just quickly going to look at a series of maps. Next, please. Yes. Quickly rattling you through the 8. Assam, as you see in the northeast, is where the form that's spelt Satriya comes from. It's, in my experience, always pronounced Hatriya. And I'm not going to show you any today. I have seen it, and I've seen it once beautifully done, but I wouldn't know if I'm seeing exemplary Satriya or simply one very good dancer who happens to do the form. I've seen some rather less interesting amateur Satriya. Next, please. Also in Northeast, slightly different state is Manipur, and the dance form from it is Manipuri. I've seen one wonderful male-female couple doing it, both across India and in Edinburgh, actually. Again, I don't know if they show you pure Manipuri or whether it is just they who are wonderful. Next, please. Okay, north of Delhi, we have 3 of these cities, or south of Delhi too, Jaipur, and then I haven't named it, but that's Varanasi and Lucknow. Those are 3 homes of the form called Kathak, which we're going to look at a bit of, which is brilliant footwork, brilliant turns. Next, please. Now down in the southeast, that's Kerala. That's where I saw Tayam in the very north, but it's also home of 2 of the forms called classical. One is the all-male Kathakali form, and one is the all-female form, Mohiniyattam. Next, please. That's the state of Odisha, or Orissa, and you can get into controversies about which one you say, but that's where Odissi comes from. Next, just south of that is Andhra Pradesh, and right in the middle, quite near the coast, is the small village of Kuchipudi, which has become the home of a whole genre called Kuchipudi, which is now practiced internationally. Next, please. Here's Tamil Nadu, which is where Shobana is from. Shobana comes right near the south of it, near the Kerala border, is that right?
Yes.
Near the north and the east is Chennai, Madras as it once was, and other great centers of Bharatanatyam are cities near the middle and the south, like Tanjavur and Madurai and so forth. Okay, that gives you a little bit of your bearings. We are going to examine you on this afterwards, by the way. I think all of these forms, except for Kathakali, use, is it pronounced the gungru?
Gungrus, yeah.
Those are the ankle bells. You see these 3 chains of them. Again, all of them are barefoot. Let's look at the first video now. This is from Kathak, and we're going to see a British dancer, Bangladeshi by race. That's the man Akram Khan on the right. Akram Khan is now well known as a modern dance choreographer. He's also recently worked with ballet companies, but he is trained as a virtuoso Kathak dancer and is respected in India by Kathak practitioners. This is just a tiny little clip. We're just going to see him moving with a guru fast, show you some of what Kathak style is about. often you see Kathak dances ending with this beautiful arm flourish, I would guess that ignorant though the ballet La Bayadère is in many ways, that arm gesture you so often see in parts of La Bayadère comes from the Kathak dancer doing this, I'm guessing.
Possibly.
La Bayadère is now, by the way, being cancelled all around the world because it is a big misrepresentation of much of the Indian culture. And once I'd spent time in India, I began to become rather anti-Bayadère myself, I have to admit. One thing about Kathak is you see it has amazing speed, amazing percussiveness of the foot, and these amazing turns. And it's all to do, I think, with counts of 16. You would know how to do blah, 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 and then you stop on number 17 every so often. And when well done, I have seen it to taped music, but it should always really be done with live music because it's like jazz. You see it a game between the musician and the dancer, and that ability to stop on the beat is thrilling. Next photograph, please. Oh, this is Mohiniyattam. This is the female form from Kerala. Historically, this is quite controversial. Some people think it's almost entirely an invention of the Indian Republic. Some people, however, claim it goes back centuries. We don't know. But the beautiful thing about it is to do with a very sensuous sway of the whole body, the knee, the pelvis, and the upper body. You see a little bit of that there in rehearsal. Now I'm going to show you photographs again that I took of the male form Kathakali, and I just want to show you the phenomenal makeup, which takes 3 hours to apply. It's even more intense than the makeup for Tayan. That's a finished Kathakali dancer. Now let's look next. This is the beginning of the makeup session. I was around this place for 3 hours. Next, please. A bit more being put on. Next. Now you see the lines. Next. 3 men being laid down with people applying makeup to them. Next. More makeup as you see. Next, please. We're only halfway there. Next, please. Now these extraordinary lower eyelashes or whatever are applied. Next. Next. This is, again, one of my favorite photographs, a different dancer, but just look at the care. Wonderful. Next, please. And now you see some Kathakali in performance, the people actually sitting on the side of the stage. Next, please. And I think, is that the last? I think it is, yes. I sat through one Kathakali performance for 3 hours, and I saw one, I think the next night, I think it went on all night from something like 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I only caught about 2 hours of that. What was fascinating was they were two completely different genres. And I'd seen fragments of Kathakali in New York before that, but now seeing it in India, I realized one of the thrills of it was rhythmic, but it was a different rhythm each night. So I thought, this is a vast genre, and I can only begin to sample it now. We've talked quite a lot about Bharatanatyam, and there is so much more for us to stay. Can we just look now at a little bit of Kuchipudi in the next video? Oh, sorry, we had Momo. Oh, look at these. Sorry, aren't those thrilling, those last photographs? Next, please. Oh, yeah, thank you. Now we're going to Kuchipudi. This is a young virtuoso male dancer called Avijit Das. Again, we're just going to see a few seconds, but it'll show you the speed which this is capable of. Not just speed, but mime expressiveness. Great, that's just a little sample. Now let's go to Odissi, and we're going to look at two of the world's most beautiful women. Sorry if that's incorrect. One is one of the real royal families of Odissi, Sujata Mohapatra, and she's doing the form of Odissi developed by her father-in-law, Kalacharan Mohapatra. Let's look. Here she's really doing pure form. try to work out the coordination that's going on throughout the body here. It is so amazing. What we're straight away spotting with each of these forms is the physicality of each form, but the differences are also musical, and I am too musically illiterate and rhythmically too illiterate to tell you or to begin to understand the rhythmic differences between the genres of each nation or each part, each state, but they are there and they are vitally discussed. That really shows you pure form. This wonderful dancer, Sujata Mahapatra, once did the most enchanting dance in New York, which is very much to do with Abhinaya, expressive dance. But now I'm going to show you some Abhinaya done by another Odissi dancer. And I thought it would be interesting to see her out of formal costume, just in rehearsal, taken with my own phone. This is Bijoyni Satpati last October. I'm embarrassed to say that is my jacket and my scarf in the background. She then went on to dance this in full costume that evening. And by the way, she's 50 years old. This is a dance to do with the love of Krishna and Radha. Particularly the love felt by Radha for Krishna.
Poisonous arrows of hatred. Their friend, the sacrifice. He pleads and coaxes and cajoles them to carry his lovely message to Radha and bring her to him.
This is a rehearsal, and you'll see 2 points when she just stops and talks to the musicians. These were live musicians at the rehearsal. And as Shobana was saying, if you're Indian, you know the myth that this depicts. If you're Western, you don't, and yet I find it fascinating that in these expressive mime dances, I'm often not really following the story, I'm just looking at formal qualities, because it is just so beautiful. I can see that something is being expressed, I can't always follow it as narrative. now she breaks. On that note, I think we'll end our talk. Please, we will be inviting questions from you all. What time are we?
Yeah, I think you could skip.
We don't have time.
It's.
You have. And I've got a question anyway for Shobana, because, and this is a kind of pre-arranged question because it came up during our emails, which is, of course, what is being done in modern terms with these languages. Actually, within Odissi, this last dancer, Bejoni Satpathy, is considered something of a heretic because she is doing new aspects of movement and often moving into pure form, shall we say, more in physicality, more than traditional Odissi dancers. This is my cue to ask to see one of your wonderful dancers who is trained in Odissi as well as Bharatanatyam, Suraj Subramanian.
Yeah. Well, do you think we've got time?
Yes.
Yes, so actually, for me, it's like a footnote to what we've been discussing about Indian classical dance, and it's sort of what I say, it's a very checkered history of Indian classical dance. So one of the things as a choreographer that I decided was, in a way, to I had some decisions to make as to where this classical tradition actually sat for me. So when I was actually looking at that video of Akram in India, it kind of reminded me of, I think that was a BBC film. And so probably, I don't know, 5 years before that, I had the similar situation with the BBC. They wanted to make a film of my company. But there's one thing I feel very strongly about, so I didn't want to go to India, because that's exactly what they wanted me to do, is to go and meet my guru in Chennai and sit under a banyan tree probably. And I just felt, no, I just want to be, I live in Britain, this is where I'm going to choreograph, this is where I'm going to dance. I actually stopped doing Bharatanatyam just because I felt there was just no way I felt I could translate that dance that I just showed you, Kavava, just because it was just so specific to a particular time. I could talk and I could try and translate the words, but it would take me so long. So my decision was to stop doing Indian classical dance here, and also to try and see, as a choreographer, find some answers. I haven't got any perfect answers as to what dancing body with those traditions, how does it speak to a different audience? I haven't found any answers, but anyway, this particular thing, it was commissioned by, it was at the Venice Biennale, and I was asked to choreograph something in this refectory with the very famous painting of Veronese, The Wedding at Cana. The strange thing, it was actually a digital representation of The Wedding at Cana, because as in all colonial histories, the real one was taken by Napoleon, and now it's in the Louvre. So I thought actually that was a very nice place for me to be there, a kind of a fraudulent but authentic place. So this is the dance that I choreographed for Suraj in that refectory. We'll just watch a little bit of it, because I'd love to have your questions more than.
Should we have some light?
No, we're just going to watch this video, and then afterwards we'll.
It's hard to capture the feeling. I remember it happened. It was such a cold. On the way to the supermarket rails at the subway station. There was a signature.
Could we have the sound a little bit louder, Franco? Thank you.
Wonderful.
Very
What a
That was
fabulous
one-
juxtaposition of dancer and painting. Great. Something I wanted also to add before we have questions is that I think, and I'm not the expert here, one of the precepts of the Natya Shastra is that movement should always contain stillness, and that stillness should always contain movement. And I think all the videos have been showing absolutely show that each dancer in the middle of the movement can suddenly stop, and yet the movement carries on while they are frozen in a sculptural position. And while they are in movement, you nonetheless feel that there's an inner stillness within. Wonderful to see. Any questions, please?
Questions, anyone? There must be. There's so much to
I
take
see a
in
hand.
here.
I see two hands. At the back row. Thank you, Franco.
Thank you. That was so engaging. I wondered if you could comment, given the discussions on sort of the political implications of different languages, Tamil versus Sanskrit. We also heard English in the clips, and also your mentioning of the importance of rhythm. Does the kind of rhythm of speech in different languages impact the aesthetics of the dances?
Yeah, definitely. So in the Tamil Kirtana, there's very single syllables, ka, va, va, and they're very lengthened and played with. Obviously, that makes you want to move the body in a different way. This particular one, which you probably couldn't hear very clearly, it's a script about somebody finding out who they are. So that's about someone going to a supermarket. But in a way, it's the juxtaposition of those kind of very everyday things, and then the body moving in a slightly more exoticized manner in some ways. So either one can go with the language, or one can deliberately go against the language. But whatever you do, definitely it has implications for how the body moves.
And when the dance goes into the nritta section, the pure form section, you often get these kind of abstract syllable sounds.
Correct. Yes.
Are they just sounds, or are they arranged in something that would make some kind of sense to the speaker of the language?
No, it actually only makes musical sense, and it's also a very easy way of counting with energy. I mean, like for example, before I was counting 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Obviously, in Bharatanatyam, we've got syllables, so we've got te, like that. It's much easier to go takita, and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It just takes. By the time you said 7, you're actually on the 8th count, because obviously there are two syllables in 7. So yeah.
That's great, thank you.
Yes.
Next question. I haven't forgotten you.
Thank you. That was brilliant. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I wanted to ask something about the context of the performance, where these dances were originally performed, in what occasion. You explained that they had a religious value and essentially was a way to pray with the body. So were these performed at religious festivals or at the court of wealthy owners or sponsors? I'm really interested because, I study ancient Greek tragedy, and so I'm familiar with that kind of culture. And for me, drawing this parallel is quite important. Thank you very much.
I'll go first and then I'll be correct. It's always traditionally said that Kathak is the form of the courts, and it's the form of the courts of Lucknow and Varanasi and Jaipur. I think most of the other forms are connected to temples, but I don't know about the ones of the northeast, Hatriya and Manipuri.
Well, in Bharatanatyam, it was seen in all 3 places. There are temples where they had performance areas. So there obviously was a tradition of the dancer dancing in front of the deity, perhaps even not even facing an audience, but maybe facing the other way. Certainly in more recent history, it was patronized by the kings. So performance in courts was also there. But then, this story that I was referring to, Silapadiharam, see there, she was, the dancer in the story is doing it during the festival of Indra, so religious festival, but they actually make a stage. So there's a description how the stage was made. So I think even if it's a religious festival, it sometimes probably wasn't inside the temple, and certainly there's a very long tradition of dancers accompanying the icon of a temple when it went in procession. So the dancers would go in front of the icon with musicians. So I think it's but definitely I think the impetus certainly for the dance was religious, because all the songs. But as we're saying, in India it's quite difficult to say religious and secular as two separate things, because actually that again is a very European concept to make that division between both these things. Because we've got very, very sexualized songs that one dances to in Indian, in Bharatanatyam. But in the end, it's always rationalized as between God and man, So.
When I was in Tamil Nadu, I saw a number of dance festivals. Some of them would have gone all night. I was there for 6 hours in one case, but they went on another 6 hours after I'd left. But because it was in a temple, I nonetheless went with a kind of attitude that I would take to going to something in church and trying to be respectable. And suddenly there were speeches, and amid it all, because I was visiting from the New York Times, of course word had got around Indian dance. And suddenly I heard blah, 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 in this language I didn't understand, Mr. Macaulay, Mr. Macaulay, and I thought, I hope this isn't me. It was me, I'm afraid. And they were expecting me to present the prizes, but also to make a little speech about how happy I was to be in India. And I think this is not what I meant. It's my idea of what I do in temple or in church. All of this was included somehow. Very funny for me. I'm not sure I should have laughed out loud, but in my heart I did. And when you were worried that we'd gone on too long, I looked and we ended exactly on the minute we wanted to end. But let's just take one more question. I saw somebody on the aisle who was going to ask a question. Yeah, I think it was you, sir. Well, there are two people now.
There are two. There's one in the
Let's just do one, and we will go on. There are drinks, and there is buffet supper. Please come and join
time
us.
for drinks.
Hi. Okay. So I've been a Manipuri dancer for 30 years, and I also work in anthropology and critical dance studies. It's more of a side comment. The history of Indian classical dance is never the history of Manipuri dance.
No, sure.
It's also because it's related to the birth of an independent nation. So that thing you're talking about, classicism and republic, they're all connected how the arts were funded.
Yeah.
So a lot of these arts were sort of brought into this forum of classicism, classical, national, regional distinctions. And dance patronage is the one that has always suffered. And something like Bharatanatyam and Kathak has always got a lot of funding, a lot of understanding, a lot of academic who have worked in it.
For certain people.
For certain people. And even within the whole classical canon, because I work on Manipuri, I know it's always been minoritized and sidelined. And it has to do with region versus nation now. So the social, the political, financial, they're all very deeply interconnected. And till the time you were not showing Suraj and Bijoyni's clips, I was thinking that it's still, the notion is that the classical is still so fixed. But it's not. It's gone through so many different histories of fluidity that it's almost heartening to see that there are so many different forms of classical within the classical itself. So thank you for showing the last two clips, actually.
Well, thank you, that's wonderful. I should say Bijoyni and I, we both feel we don't know anything enough about the northeastern dance forms. We made a little resolution we're going to go to the northeast together of India to look into those forms. The other thing I want to say is Odissi, which to me is so rich and so beautiful and has been developed wonderfully into this complicated language, almost entirely has been redeveloped since the British Raj. It was virtually extinct when the British left. And 3 gurus in particular who had been boys and had done some of the training as Gotipois, which is the kind of boys who learnt female roles with extraordinary acrobatics. At the end of the British Raj, they put together again the Odissi form after the departure of the British. And now they have this extraordinary rich form. But whether it is authentic Odissi going back, we do know that Odissi goes back 2 millennia, but how much is the same, we just don't know. And even the music may have changed out of recognition.
I don't know whether we need it to be authentic as
True,
long as...
true. I mean, if you look into flamenco, that has changed art of recognition.
I think you can tell, I mean, I think what has been wonderful about this discussion is that it tells us so much about the way we think about the word classical here, everywhere. You know, I mean, we think of classical ballet and so on, but there are so many different forms and so many politicized things. Yeah. So anyway, I'm very sorry to bring this to a close because we could go on all night. Please continue to ask questions out in the foyer, and we will just give a huge thank you to Shobana and Alastair.
Thank you. Thank you, Shobana.
Thank you, Shobana. Thank you, Alastair. And I'm sorry to bring it to a close, but I'm aware that people are working, such as the staff who are going to give us drinks, and some people are coming for supper. So I think the only answer to this is to do another session. Yes, we need part 2.
And please come also for the Sue Jones evening in the next academic year.
No, forget that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is really, really good. Thank you so much.
Very